Wags here. Well, this is welcome to the episode of Addiction and Recovery, brought to you by Wags Creations. This is a podcast I'm starting to talk about, obviously addiction and recovery. I'll be on here sharing a lot of my experiences and what I've gone through as far as, you know, my journey through this recovery process. I have 151 days clean today. Um, it's definitely been a struggle this time. I was out here about 8 months prior. I had 90 days under my belt, went through the program, thought I had it won. I thought I had it beat. I had this feeling of, all these good things had happened to me. I had started my business. I produced two music albums, and there was no resistance throughout the whole time in that recovery process. And, I thought I had it beat, and boy, was I wrong. I went back to my hometown and immediately I had relapsed. And right away I realized I'd made a mistake. So I decided making arrangements to come back out to LA because I went back to my hometown, Fresno. And so I made arrangements immediately, but I wasn't going to be able to come back out until the first of the following month. So I still had a month out there where I was just continuously using. My drug of choice is fentanyl. And I'm not saying fentanyl is any worse than any other drug, but the withdrawal from that is just terrible. It's definitely the worst thing I've ever had to go through and the hardest thing I've ever had to go through in life. The worst pain I've ever felt. And I thought the first time was bad, but the second time was even worse. You know, I came back out here to treatment in LA and I made it into a detox. And it was really wild. Normally in detox, you have 5, 6, 7, 8 other people in there with you, but when I got there, they had a few other people there, but they literally went through 10 clients in the first week I was there. And then I was just by myself, nobody else there for the whole month. That was an interesting experience. It was very lonely, you know, um, but it allowed me to really have to be okay with myself, and my thoughts. And it allowed me to really work on myself from the inside out, something that I wasn't able to do the first time I came out here. So that was great. It was tough. It was not easy. Definitely had an emotional roller coaster being there by myself and being stuck with my own thoughts, but I think it really ended up benefiting me because I was able to learn how to be okay with myself and being with myself and my thoughts, which is something I wasn't really good at before. I used to always be terrified of being alone. So definitely a different experience. Then I got into sober living. Still wasn't very easy. Within that 30 to 60 day time frame of me being sober, I was struggling. I'd gotten into sober living. I wasn't really feeling it. Nothing was going my way. It wasn't like the first time I was out here where everything was kind of handed to me. I had all the support and things like that. I still had support. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't the same. People weren't really sure if I was really committed or not, which I understood. I get that. But I just knew, even though things were going my way and I was getting frustrated, I was feeling like I wanted to go back to Fresno, but I knew I didn't want that life. I knew I needed something different. So I really had to learn how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And that was hard for me. But I just knew I needed something different. So I just kept showing up, kept going to meetings, kept doing my program, doing the next right thing. Um, Even though it didn't feel right at the time, I just knew I needed to try something new. Hi, I'm starting a brand new podcast called Addiction and Recovery by Wags Creations. It is a safe place where we can get vulnerable and share our real experiences. Please, this podcast is truly close to my heart. I want us to build a community together. So please follow me and stay updated. And check the link in the description for more. And it was tough because, like I said, showing up to these groups every day and all this stuff, everything was just seemed so redundant. Like I was just hearing the same shit every day over and over, but um, and all of a sudden one day that changed, and I think once I was able to show up to these groups and meetings and things with an open mind and an open heart, both of those at the same time, I think something changed in me. Like this wall dropped and I was able to get a lot more out of these meetings. I was starting to find a lot more similarities in people's shares. Everything didn't seem the same all the time. Um, I was really getting a lot more out of all the shares and groups and things like that. And I just all of a sudden had a peace about myself that I hadn't felt in a really long time. Things are still not perfect, but I was really happy with the way my life was growing and the direction it was going. I started school. Right now I'm in my second month, second class. It's one class a month. So I finished my first class, got 100% on everything, which is crazy because I never expected to be doing that well. I I figured I'd get the job done, but I didn't expect to be getting 100% on everything, which is amazing. Just proving to myself what, I'm capable of, which is awesome. I knew I always had it in me, but at the level that I'm doing, you know, working right now, it's just, I'm amazing myself, and it feels really good. I started getting into service. That made a huge difference to me too. That was huge for me, getting into service and eventually becoming not only a trusted servant, but also a host. I host meetings, NA meetings once a month or once a week. I'm sorry. And that did so much for me. I really started listening to all the suggestions that people started making, that you hear in groups and meetings and things like that, like getting into service, how, it really does wonders for people. I started taking all these little suggestions that I didn't take before, I never really took seriously. And man, and all those little cliche sayings, like works if you work it or one day at a time, I know they seem corny, but it's crazy how true they all are. There's a reason why they say them all the time, and there's a reason why they keep saying them. It's because they work. And you're going to get out of this program whatever you put into it. So if you're working the program like you're supposed to, it does work. I'm telling you, there's a reason why Narcotics Anonymous is so huge. Um, and it's just amazing what I get out of this group. This group has saved my life, and it just wasn't just the NA group, obviously, I had to do other things outside of my life, learning how to apply these things that I've learned, these spiritual principles and all this stuff in our literature, learning how to apply that in my daily life is, it really just been amazing as far as the results that I've been getting and just the feeling I have spiritually, mentally, even emotionally, I feel pretty sound, I have a lot of work to do. And I also get that recovery is something I'm going to have to work on for the rest of my life. It's not something that's just going to be fixed one day or I'm going to be recovered. That'll never happen. And that was a mistake I made the first time I came out here. I thought I was recovered, and that definitely wasn't the case. So, with that understanding, I just know this is something I'm going to have to work on the rest of my life, and I'm okay with that. I don't care about being labeled as an addict. I used to, but I eventually had to swallow my pride, and I don't care that I'm an addict. It is what it is. You have to be honest with yourself in this program. That's a big part of it too, and I'm okay with being labeled an addict. Addicts are some of the most amazing people I've ever met, and um, there's nothing, I mean, yeah, there's something wrong with us. Obviously, that's why we're addicts, but, we are really special people. There's a reason why we're hypersensitive to certain things, because it's just the type of people that we are. And I've just seen some really amazing, beautiful people, come out of addiction and do some amazing things in life, so, for those of you who feel like you're hopeless or, that's not the kind of life for you. Trust me, it is. You'll be surprised at what things you can accomplish and things that you can do and what direction your life can take, and the opportunities that come along with that. It's life can be beautiful. You get out of life what you put into it, and that I'm a huge believer in that. Yeah, life's gonna throw you curveballs. Life's gonna life on you. Don't get me wrong, but being in recovery and having Narcotics Anonymous as a stronghold for me. Being able to go into those groups and see familiar faces and share my experiences and listen to other people's experiences and things like that has just helped me so tremendously. I can't stress that enough for people out there just getting into recovery. I used to think the same thing, like, whatever, it's the same shit. But it's really not. Like I said, once you allow yourself to show up to those meetings and groups and things with an open mind and an open heart, there's something that happens, and it's they call that a spiritual awakening, I guess, but you know, um, some people call it different things, but I really started feeling a change and, like I said, a peace about myself that I haven't felt in so long. Like I feel content. I'm not complacent. There's a difference between being complacent and content. I feel content with the way my life is going and the decisions I've been making. And I know I have so much work to do and a long ways to go, but it's really beautiful some of the things that have happened in my life just in these 5 months. And I'm just so excited to see what the next 5, 6 months brings, and where I'm going to be at in life. It's amazing, you know, um, just living life again on life's terms, and being able to do that with integrity and honesty and, living with these spiritual principles that I've learned in my literature, Narcotics Anonymous is just, it's awesome, you know. So as far as this podcast is concerned, there will be times where I have guests on here talking about their experiences in recovery and things like that. If you want to be a guest on my show, just let me know. Shoot me a message. I'm easy. Um, and all are welcome. I want this to be a safe place where people can come and share their experiences and just feel welcome. And just talk about life in general and what they're going through, and maybe talk about some of the hardships that they're having to go through, and I just want this to be a place of support, and build a family here, and where people can feel welcome and feel like they can just be open and vulnerable, because that's what it's all about. That's how we grow as people, and learning from each other. I think it's huge, 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 huge. Because I know recovery can be lonely sometimes. You're getting all these new things that are happening in your life that you're not used to, and it can feel uncomfortable at times. So being able to have a group of people that you can go to that are familiar and that are going through some of the same experiences you are, is huge. It's definitely huge. So just know that you're not alone. I'm here for you, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there willing to help as long as you have the willingness to want to change your life. So that's what this show's all about. And this is my first episode, guys. So bear with me. Um, I'll share some links and things like that in the description so that way you guys know where to find me. Love you guys. Go out there and kill it. I know I'm going to. Wags out.